Numbers, chapters 30 to 32, Notes on the Pentateuch by C.H.M. This brief section has what we may term a dispensational bearing. It applies specially to Israel, and treats of the question of vows and bonds. The man and the woman stand in marked contrast in relation to this subject. If a man vow a vow to the Lord, or swear an oath to bind his soul with a bond, he shall not break his word, he shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. Verse 2. In reference to the woman, the case was different. If a woman also vow a vow to the Lord, and bind herself by a bond, being in her father's house in her youth, and her father hear her vow, and her bond wherewith she has bound her soul, and her father shall hold his peace at her, then all her vows shall stand, and every word wherewith she has bound her soul shall stand. But if her father disallow her in the day that he hears, not any of her vows, or of her bonds wherewith she has bound her soul, shall stand, and the Lord shall forgive her, because her father disallowed her. Verses 3 to 5, the same thing applied in the case of a wife. Her husband could either confirm or disannul all her vows and bonds. Such was the law with regard to vows. There was no relief for the man. He was bound to go right through with whatever had proceeded out of his mouth. Whatever he undertook to do, he was solemnly and irreversibly held to it. There was no back door, as we say, no way of getting out of it. Now we know who, in perfect grace, took this position, and voluntarily bound himself to accomplish the will of God, whatever that will might be. We know who it is that says, "I will pay my vows to the Lord now in the presence of all his people." The man Christ Jesus, who, having taken the vows upon him, discharged them perfectly to the glory of God, and the eternal blessing of his people. There was no escape for him. We hear him exclaiming, in the deep anguish of his soul, in the Garden of Gethsemane, "If it be possible, let this cup pass from me." But it was not possible. He had undertaken the work of man's salvation, and he had to go through the deep and dark waters of death, judgment, and wrath, and perfectly meet all the consequences of man's condition. He had a baptism to be baptized with, and was straitened until it was accomplished. In other words, he had to die in order that, by death, he might open the pent-up floodgates, and allow the mighty tide of divine and everlasting love to flow down to his people. All praise and adoration be to his peerless name forever. Thus much as to the man and his vows and bonds. In the case of the woman, whether as the daughter or the wife, we have the nation of Israel, and that in two ways, namely, under government and under grace. Looked at from a governmental point of view, Jehovah, who is at once the father and the husband, has held his peace at her, so that her vows and bonds are allowed to stand, and she is, to this day, suffering the consequences, and made to feel the force of those words, "Better that thou shouldest not vow, than that thou shouldest vow and not pay." But, on the other hand, as viewed from the blessed standpoint of grace, the father and the husband has taken all upon himself, so that she shall be forgiven and brought into the fullness of blessing by and by, not on the ground of accomplished vows and ratified bonds, but on the ground of sovereign grace and mercy, through the blood of the everlasting covenant. How precious to find Christ everywhere! He is the center and foundation, the beginning and the end, of all the ways of God. May our hearts be ever filled with him. May our lips and lives speak his praise. May we, constrained by his love, live to his glory all our days upon earth, and then go home to be with himself forever, to go no more out. We have here given what we believe to be the primary thought of this chapter. That it may be applied, in a secondary way, to individuals, we do not, by any means, question, and further, that, like all Scripture, it has been written for our learning, we most thankfully own. It must ever be the delight of the devout Christian to study all the ways of God, whether in grace or government, his ways with Israel, his ways with the church, his ways with all, his ways with each. Oh! To pursue this study with an enlarged heart and an enlightened understanding. Numbers 31. We have here the closing scene of Moses' official life, as in Deuteronomy 34 we have the closing scene of his personal history. "And the Lord spake to Moses, saying, Avenge the children of Israel of the Midianites, afterward shalt thou be gathered to thy people. And Moses spake to the people, saying, Arm some of yourselves to the war, and let them go against the Midianites, and avenge the Lord of Midian. Of every tribe 1,000, throughout all the tribes of Israel, shall ye send to the war. So there were delivered out of the thousands of Israel, 1,000 of every tribe, 12,000 armed for war. And Moses sent them to the war, 1,000 of every tribe, them and Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest, to the war, with the holy instruments, and the trumpets to blow in his hand. And they warred against the Midianites, as the Lord commanded Moses, and they slew all the males. Verses 3-7. This is a very remarkable passage. The Lord says to Moses, "Avenge the children of Israel of the Midianites." And Moses says to Israel, "Avenge the Lord of Midian." The people had been ensnared by the wiles of the daughters of Midian, through the evil influence of Balaam the son of Peor, and they are now called upon to clear themselves thoroughly from all the defilement which, through want of watchfulness, they had contracted. The sword is to be brought upon the Midianites, and all the spoil is to be made to pass either through the fire of judgment or through the water of purification. Not one jot or tittle of the evil thing is to be suffered to pass unjudged. Now, this war was what we may call abnormal. I write, the people ought not to have had any occasion to encounter it at all. It was not one of the wars of Canaan. It was simply the result of their own unfaithfulness, the fruit of their own unhallowed commerce with the uncircumcised. Hence, although Joshua, the son of Nun, had been duly appointed to succeed Moses, as leader of the congregation, we find no mention whatever of him in connection with this war. On the contrary, it is to Phinehas, the son of Eleazar the priest, that the conduct of this expedition is committed, and he enters upon it with the holy instruments and the trumpets. All this is strongly marked. The priest is the prominent person, and the holy instruments, the prominent instrumentality. It is a question of wiping away the stain caused by their unholy association with the enemy, and therefore, instead of a general officer with sword and spear, it is a priest with holy instruments that appears in the foreground. True, the sword is here, but it is not the prominent thing. It is the priest with the vessels of the sanctuary, and that priest the selfsame man who first executed judgment upon that very evil which has here to be avenged. The moral of all this is, at once, plain and practical. The Midianites furnish a type of that peculiar kind of influence which the world exerts over the hearts of the people of God, the fascinating and ensnaring power of the world used by Satan to hinder our entrance upon our proper heavenly portion. Israel should have had nothing to do with these Midianites, but having, in an evil hour and unguarded moment, been betrayed into association with them, nothing remains but war and utter extermination. So with us, as Christians, our proper business is to pass through the world, as pilgrims and strangers, having nothing to do with it, save to be the patient witnesses of the grace of Christ, and thus shine as lights in the midst of the surrounding moral gloom. But, alas! We fail to maintain this rigid separation, we suffer ourselves to be betrayed into alliance with the world, and, in consequence, we get involved in trouble and conflict which does not properly belong to us at all. War with Midian formed no part of Israel's proper work. They had to thank themselves for it. But God is gracious, and hence, through a special application of priestly ministry, they were enabled, not only to conquer the Midianites, but to carry away much spoil. God, in His infinite goodness, brings good out of evil. He will cause the eater to yield meat, and the strong sweetness. His grace shines out, with exceeding brightness, in the scene before us, inasmuch as He actually deigns to accept a portion of the spoils taken from the Midianites. But the evil had to be thoroughly judged. Every male had to be put to death, all in whom there was the energy of the evil had to be completely exterminated, and finally the fire of judgment and the water of purification had to do their work on the spoil, ere God or His people could touch an atom of it. What holy lessons are here! May we apply our hearts to them. May we be enabled to pursue a path of more intense separation, and to press on our heavenly road as those whose portion and whose home is on high. God, in His mercy, grant it. Numbers 32. The fact recorded in this chapter has given rise to considerable discussion. Various have been the opinions advanced in reference to the conduct of the 2 tribes and a half. Were they right or were they wrong in choosing their inheritance on the wilderness side of Jordan? This is the question. Was their acting in this matter the expression of power or of weakness? How are we to form a sound judgment in this case? In the first place, where was Israel's proper portion, their divinely destined inheritance? Most surely, on the other side of Jordan, in the land of Canaan. Well, then, ought not this fact to have sufficed? Would or could a really true heart, a heart that thought, and felt, and judged with God, have entertained the idea of selecting a portion other than that which God had allotted and bestowed? Impossible. Hence, then, we need not to go further, in order to have a divine judgment on this subject. It was a mistake, a failure, a stopping short of the divine mark, on the part of Reuben and Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, to choose any boundary line short of the river Jordan. They were governed, in their conduct, by worldly and selfish considerations, by the sight of their eyes, by carnal motives. They surveyed the land of Jazer and the land of Gilead, and they estimated it entirely according to their own interests, and without any reference to the judgment and will of God. Had they been simply looking to God, the question of settling down short of the river Jordan would never have been raised at all. But when people are not simple, not true-hearted, they get into circumstances which give rise to all sorts of questions. It is a great matter to be enabled, by divine grace, to pursue a line of action, and to tread a path so unequivocal as that no question can be raised. It is our holy and happy privilege so to carry ourselves as that no complication may ever arise. The secret of so doing is to walk with God, and thus to have our conduct wholly governed by His word. But that Reuben and Gad were not thus governed, is manifest from the entire history. They were half and half men, men of mixed principles, mere borderers, men that sought their own things, and not the things of God. Had these latter engrossed their hearts, nothing would have induced them to take up their position short of the true boundary line. It is very evident that Moses had no sympathy with their proposal. It was a judgment upon his conduct that he was not allowed to go over. His heart was in the promised land, and he longed to go thither in person. How could he then approve of the conduct of men who were not only prepared, but actually desirous, to take up their abode somewhere else? Faith can never be satisfied with anything short of the true position and portion of God's people. A single eye can only see, a faithful heart only desire, the inheritance given of God. Hence, therefore, Moses at once condemned the proposition of Reuben and Gad. True, he afterwards relaxed his judgment and gave his consent. Their promise to cross the Jordan, ready armed, before their brethren, drew from Moses a kind of assent. It seemed an extraordinary manifestation of unselfishness and energy to leave all their loved ones behind, and cross the Jordan, only to fight for their brethren. But where had they left those loved ones? They had left them short of the divine mark. They had deprived them of a place and a portion in the true land of promise, that inheritance of the which God had spoken to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And for what? Just to get good pasture for their cattle. For an object like this did the 2 tribes and a half abandon their place within the true limits of the Israel of God. And now let us look at the consequences of this line of action. Let the reader turn to Joshua 22. Here we have the first sorrowful effect of the equivocal conduct of Reuben and Gad. They must needs build an altar, a great altar, to see till lest in time to come their brethren might disown them. What does all this prove? It proves that they were all wrong in taking up their position on this side of Jordan, and only mark the effect upon the whole assembly, the disturbing, alarming effect of this altar. At the first blush, it wore the aspect of actual rebellion. And when the children of Israel heard of it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered themselves together at Shiloh, to go up to war against them. And the children of Israel sent to the children of Reuben, and to the children of Gad, and to the half-tribe of Manasseh, note, into the land of Gilead, Phinehas the son of Eleazar the priest, and with him 10 princes, of each chief house a prince throughout all the tribes of Israel, and each one was an head of the house of their fathers among the thousands of Israel. And they came to the children of Reuben, and to the children of Gad, and to the half-tribe of Manasseh, to the land of Gilead, and they spake with them, saying, Thus says the whole congregation of the Lord, did not the 2.5 belong to it? What trespass is this that ye have committed against the God of Israel, to turn away this day from following the Lord, in that ye have builded you an altar, that ye might rebel this day against the Lord? Is the iniquity of Peor too little for us, from which we are not cleansed until this day, although there was a plague in the congregation of the Lord, but that ye must turn away this day from following the Lord? And it will be, seeing ye rebel today against the Lord, that tomorrow he will be wroth with the whole congregation of Israel. Notwithstanding, If the land of your possession be unclean, then pass ye over to the land of the possession of the Lord, wherein the Lord's tabernacle dwells. What burning words, and take possession among us, but rebel not against the Lord, nor rebel against us, in building you an altar beside the altar of the Lord our God. Joshua 22 verses 12 to 19. Note as though the 2 tribes and a half were actually detached from the nation of Israel. End of note. Now all this serious misunderstanding, all this trouble and alarm, was the result of failure on the part of Reuben and Gad. True, they are able to explain themselves and satisfy their brethren in reference to the altar. But then there would have been no need of the altar, no demand for explanation, no cause of alarm, had they not taken up an equivocal position. Here was the source of all the mischief, and it is important for the Christian reader to seize this point with clearness, and to deduce from it the great practical lesson which it is designed to teach. It can hardly be questioned, by any thoughtful, spiritually minded person who fully weighs all the evidence in the case, that the 2 tribes and a half were wrong in stopping short of the Jordan, in taking up their position. This seems to us unquestionable, seen on the ground of what has already come before us, and if further proof were needed, it is furnished by the fact that they were the very first to fall into the enemy's hands. See 1 Kings 22 verse 3. But it may be that the reader is disposed to ask, what has all this to say to us? Has this piece of history any voice, any instruction for us? Unquestionably. It sounds in our ears, with accents of deep solemnity, beware of falling short of your proper position, your proper portion, of being content with the things which belong to this world, of taking any stand short of death and resurrection, the true, the spiritual Jordan. See note. Note, no doubt there are many sincere Christians who do not see the heavenly calling and position of the church, who do not enter into the special character of truth taught in the epistle to the Ephesians, who are, nevertheless, according to their light, earnest, devoted, and true-hearted, but we feel persuaded that such persons lose incalculable blessing in their own souls, and fall very short of the true Christian testimony. End of note. Such, we conceive, is the teaching of this portion of our book. It is a grand point to be wholehearted, decided, and unequivocal in taking our stand for Christ. Serious damage is done to the cause of God and the testimony of Christ by those who profess to be Christians denying their heavenly calling and character, and acting as though they were citizens of this world. This is a powerful engine in the hands of Satan. An undecided, half-and-half Christian is more inconsistent than an open-out-and-out worldling or infidel. The unreality of professors is more injurious by far to the cause of God than all the forms of moral pravity put together. This may seem a strong statement, but it is too true. Christian professors who are only mere borderers, men of mixed principles, persons of doubtful deportment, these are the men who most seriously damage the blessed cause, and promote the designs of the enemy of Christ. What we want, just now, is a band of wholehearted, thoroughgoing, unmistakable witnesses for Jesus Christ, men who shall declare plainly that they seek a country, earnest, unworldly men. These are the men for the present crisis. What can be more deplorable, more saddening and discouraging, than to find those who make a lofty profession, who talk loudly of death and resurrection, who boast of their high doctrines and heavenly privileges, but whose walk and ways give the lie to their words? They love the world and the things of the world. They love money and are eager to grasp and hoard as much as possible. Beloved Christian reader, let us see to these things. Let us honestly judge ourselves as in the very presence of God, and put away from us everything, no matter what, that tends to hinder the complete devotion of ourselves in spirit and soul and body to Him who loved us and gave Himself for us. May we, to use the language of Joshua 22, so carry ourselves as not to need any altar to see to, nor anything to declare where we belong to, where we worship, whose we are and whom we serve. Thus shall everything about us be transparent and unquestionable, our testimony shall be distinct, and the sound of our trumpet certain. Our peace, too, shall flow like an even river, and the entire bent of our course and character shall be to the praise of Him whose name is called upon us. May the good Lord stir up the hearts of His people, in this day of hateful indifferentism, lukewarmness, and easygoing profession, to more genuine self-surrender, true consecration to the cause of Christ, and unshaken faith in the living God. Will the reader join us in pleading for all this?